Washington is the most underrated team in the nation in 2025.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder, wherever you're getting this video, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure you click that subscribe button, click the little bell as well so you never miss when we post a new podcast. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as all that really does help us out a lot. And just a quick reminder as well, wherever you're on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, we are at Locked On Huskies on all those platforms with a whole bunch of fun stuff that we're posting over there throughout the offseason. So without further ado, let's get into today's show. I got a really fun one coming at all the everydayers out there today, where I want to talk about Washington's linebackers class in 2026. A lot of really fun prospects out there that I really can't wait to dive into. I also want to talk about some building momentum on the recruiting trail, like another crystal ball for 4-star offensive lineman Sam Utu. We'll get into all that in a little bit, but I'm so excited to talk about this because as I continue to just kind of look around the country, I've written a couple of college football previews for Athlon, Lindy's, all those sort of ones. And as I just do my research on college football as a whole, I look at this roster and I look at some of these way too early top 25s, everything like that. And, you know, to quote Jedd Fisch from all of last season, where's Washington? I look at it and I say, I don't necessarily know if Washington is going to find their way into some of these preseason top 25s, but I look at this roster and I look at the schedule and everything else about it, and I say, yeah, this team is going to find a way to make some noise this season. And a couple of shout outs I want to give right here off the bat. Shout out to one of our fabulous insiders, John Wheatston, for this awesome shirt supporting his alma mater, Aurora University football. Love to see that. And also huge shout out to a friend of the program, Nick Lemkow, because that's where this first stat comes from today. Washington is one of 2 teams in the country to return a 1,000-yard rusher and a wide receiver with 9+ receiving touchdowns from last season. For anybody who might not be in the know, obviously that's Jonah Coleman and that's Denzel Boston. And I look at that and I say, these are 2 phenomenal pieces to have when you're not necessarily breaking in a new quarterback, since he took so many snaps last season, but you have a quarterback taking his first full year of starting reps in Demond Williams. And everybody loves what he brings to the table. He's got that top 3 quarterback in the Big Ten potential this coming season, and certainly can continue to achieve higher than that, and maybe even be one of the best quarterbacks in the country, like our good buddy Jake Butt said, by the end of the season. But I look at this and I say, you put those kind of supporting pieces around him in just established names, because I look down this list and I think about guys like Omari Evans and Rashid Williams, wide receiver, and what kind of steps forward they can take this season. A freshman All-American tight end in Decker DeGraff, and what his potential could be now that he's going to be in a slightly different role this season with more healthy bodies in the room, and he won't be asked to necessarily block as much, even though he's certainly improved in that department. He's going to be utilized to the best of his skill set. And then I look in the backfield and look around Demond Williams, who's still going to take up a significant portion of carries with his legs, but alongside Jonah Coleman, you also have Adam Muhammad, who just seems like a star in the making at running back, and then Jordan Washington, who is one of the faster players in the Big Ten, in my opinion. I look at that supporting cast plus an improved offensive line in front of Demond, and I say this is a really nice way for Jedd Fisch to truly announce his arrival into the Big Ten, because this team has a lot of questions they need to answer this season. They did not win a game away from Husky Stadium last season. That includes 2 neutral site games and 5 road games. So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered in that department, which is part of what leads to Washington being so underrated, in my opinion, because you have all these different things that are, I don't want to say working against them, but that you can look back on from last season and say, oh, I don't like where this is. I don't like where that is. But after watching spring practice, after watching just the steps that this team has truly taken to continue to improve and adjust to life in the Big Ten, I look at the improvements they made along the offensive line. I look at somebody like Carver Willis, who certainly did have some struggles throughout the spring and then in the spring game as well. I look at that and I say, I think by fall camp and by the time the season rolls around, a lot of those are going to be things of the past, because he was very open and honest with us when we got a chance to talk to him during spring practice about what it's like after playing right tackle for so long, flipping back over the left side. And he said he's not where he wants to be. And now he's got a couple extra months to make sure he gets that right before he steps out on the field again for fall camp. So I like where he's going. I'm still really impressed with what Paki Finau brings to the table. And then with the rest of this unit, whether it be Landon Hatchett at center, Garen Hatchett, Drew Azzopardi, whoever ends up winning out at right tackle, I look at this unit and I say, I don't necessarily believe that it's going to be on the 2023 level of Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, the best unit in the country, but I think there's some real potential there to take a big step forward. And with Damon Williams' mobility and what Jedd Fisch's offensive scheme is going to do for him, I think that's going to just create a lot more solutions than we saw at any point last year, because with Will Rogers under center, we didn't see that mobility aspect. We didn't see them be able to move the pocket and get Damon Williams with his legs outside and, let him either make a play with his legs or find a guy downfield while throwing on the run, which he's really, really good at. So I look at all those things plus that supporting cast, and I say, yeah, I'm really confident in what this offense can do to take a step forward this season, because even when the offensive line struggled at different points last season, we saw how good it can be and what kind of just potential this scheme holds for guys like Denzel Boston and Omari Evans and Jonah Coleman and everybody else. So I look at all that and I say, I'm confident in that. But I'm even more confident in where this defense is going. And a lot of that is from a guy who I, couldn't be higher on in Tacario Davis, bringing somebody like that in to just really unlock this Ryan Walters defense, who does have a lot of Big Ten experience under his belt, which is certainly going to be a big positive. But having somebody like that with that 6'4", 200-pound frame, who has already proven to be one of the best cornerbacks in the country, come back for a senior season, reunite with John Richardson, and potentially take another big step forward before heading off the NFL draft, is something that I think is very, very important for all of this, because even though Washington's secondary was very good last year, there were still some issues that kind of arose where I like what Thaddeus Dixon and Ephesians Prysock brought to the table last year, but it was very clear that you needed just kind of a 1A sort of guy where, I don't necessarily know how I feel like Tacario Davis is still somebody that you want to go out and bring in no matter what, but depending on how you feel about Thaddeus Dixon playing inside, playing outside, it feels like he just isn't on that same level just yet. And I don't say that to knock him, but I just look at what Tacario Davis brings to this defense, and I think it's just first-round NFL potential, which is so, so difficult to find anywhere you look, especially with that, like I said, elite frame that he brings. And I love all that. I love what Washington has done with the back end of this defense, but I look at the front seven because that's where you lost games last season. I look at the Iowa loss, Penn State, Oregon, Indiana. You could not line up and stop those teams on 3rd and short, really at any point during the game, but especially in those critical downs and distances, whether it be, a 3rd and 3, a 3rd and 4. I think about how many of those Indiana picked up on the ground in that second half in that game, which was very, very winnable for a long period of time. And I look at the acquisitions that Washington has brought in at linebacker with guys like Buda Alukta, X-Ray Alexander, and Jacob Manu, if he's able to get healthy, and along the defensive line with Antario Thompson, Simone Peppa, Taitai Uyunglele. And I look at that whole group where Zach Durfee's getting healthy, Russell Davis is getting healthy. You got so many guys on the interior that you want to see take a step forward in Armand Parker, Elinius Davis, Bryce Butler, Omar Khan. I look at that whole unit, and then, that's all without Javon Parker, who looked like the best defensive tackle on the team when he was healthy last season. And we'll see what that looks like as we get into fall camp. But I look at that whole unit and I say, that is Big Ten depth. That is what you need to be able to stop the run on those 3rd and 2s, on those 4th and 1s in the red zone when teams want to go for it and try to extend a drive and kill even more clock. You didn't have that at any point last season. And I think that's the biggest thing, where it's something I've said a lot on the show. I don't necessarily know if we're going to see this turn into, this is a top 3, top 4 unit in the Big Ten at any point during the season, but I don't think you need that. I think if this unit just proves to be average to above average with the way it's able to rotate with the big guys like Simone Peppa and Logan Sagapolu in the middle, if you're just able to not get run through and give up 161, whatever it was, yards per game last season, you're going to be in a much better spot moving forward. And I think that there's so much promise from this defensive line if you can just shorten drives and give the offense an extra possession or two every single game. You're going to be in a much better spot with a schedule that is way more favorable than it was at any point last season. And I really love what this team is doing to build some momentum, but Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff are also building that momentum on the recruiting trail. But we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And speaking of winning big, I think the Huskies are going to win big this season. Like I was just saying, I have Washington over 7.5 wins this season because that's the line over on FanDuel right now. I absolutely love that. All the talent this team brings to the table, I feel like that's a steal. So you should certainly go check out that line over on FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's dive into this offensive line class because we talked about it a lot on yesterday's show, but it's worth bringing up again because it really is that important. Four-star offensive lineman Sam Utu got another crystal ball to Washington as I'm recording this on Tuesday from On3 Steve Wiltfong, which is always a great sign. And I look at what this offensive line class is right now with Cody Green and Adiong Yang, and I think it's in a really good spot. Then, as Lars and I mentioned yesterday, you add Sam Utu to that mix, all of a sudden, this is one of the best offensive line classes in the Big Ten because it has that level of high-end, both short and long-term potential. Depending on how you feel about Cody Green and if you believe that he can play early, Sam Utu absolutely has that potential as well. Where I went back and watched his film again yesterday, and I was looking at a player with incredible power, unreal power, plus really nice feet. And I look at his body right now, and I think you could play him at tackle if you want, but I really don't know if that's the best long-term option for him because I look at what he could be as a guard in this Jedd Fisch system, especially with the way he moves his feet and the way he's able to get out in front on blocks and just utilize his power because he's got good arm length for the position. I don't think arm length is going to be an issue if you do want to end up putting him at a tackle, but I look at that frame and I say, if you want to put that guy at guard, I think he's going to end up being a really, really nice mismatch for you on the interior and could be a really good lead blocker for whatever kind of speed plays and just different things you want to do with Adam Muhammad, Jordan Washington moving forward, getting those kinds of guys outside the tackle box. And it shows, as Lars mentioned yesterday, it's a really nice testament to Michael Switzer, showing what he's been able to do with this class so far, develop these relationships, which, after Washington lost Easton Tafa, I know there were some people that were a little concerned about where this offensive line group was, but Michael Switzer has proven that he can do a really good job developing these relationships quickly. And again, if you're able to secure a commitment here, that is a monstrous win for this recruiting class. And I feel like if Sam Utu is next, I feel like Dominic Harris might not be too far behind. He's supposed to visit up here on May 30th, and I just think about another guy with great power in a massive frame where he's listed at 6'8", a little under 350 pounds. And I look at what that player could bring to the table as kind of a long-term tackle projection, and I say, all of a sudden, if that's your offensive line right there, and you don't get somebody like Pulil IT Primus from Texas who's supposed to come up on an official visit, or just one of these other guys that whoever some of the everydayers out there really like, I look at that offensive line class and say, I would be really, really happy with where that is moving forward. So just a quick note there, because I think that the momentum that Washington is building is really just resonating across multiple positions right now. Another one that we did spend a little bit of time on yesterday is that wide receiver position. And we spent a lot of time talking about Terrence Sarian and what it means for him to flip to BYU. I want to look at the other side of the coin today. And I want to look at where Washington might stand with those other guys. I know there's a rumor going around with Vance Spafford, the four-star commit from Georgia commit from Mission Viejo, who is maybe down to Miami and Washington. I know that's a rumor that's been going around recently. I'm not going to go, too far into where some of these guys might be leaning, but I want to talk about what it would mean to get them into Washington's class, where Vance is the one where I feel okay right now about where Washington stands with him, because I look at just that recruitment, what he would be in Washington's scheme, where he's got such explosive speed. I love what he can do in just some of these different stack alignments, where I think about what Jacob Cowing did for Jedd Fisch in that Arizona offense, which is something that a lot of these guys have talked about as, whether it be Audric Harris, Kevin Green, Giles Jackson, even, of what Jedd Fisch wants these guys to study and how they want to operate in that offense. I feel like Vance Spafford is a really, really just high-end version of what that could be in terms of where he is right now as a high school talent. So I'm curious to see what Washington's sell with him might be, because I feel the same way about Mason James. And it feels like that's what Washington wants a lot of these receivers to be able to do, to play inside and out a little bit, where they're comfortable taking guys that might, technically be considered undersized, 5'10", 5'11", 170, 175 in that ballpark. But if they're explosive, they can catch the ball well in traffic. I point to someone like Desmond Roebuck, who's on the high end of what that looks like in a smaller player. And I say, if Kevin Cummings and Jedd Fisch and Jimmy Doherty as well are comfortable with where these guys fit in the offense at that size, I think they are must takes. And as days go by, I continue to feel better about where Washington stands with Mason James, the 4-star wide receiver from Oklahoma, who dropped his top 5 on Monday. And I look at that and I say, I think if Washington takes both those guys, the momentum that I talk about at offensive line, all of a sudden you have that at receiver as well. Because I would absolutely love that receiver class for Washington with a couple of 4-star guys where, let's be honest, you went after a couple of those top-tier targets last year and you took a nice swing, but you struck out in terms of Andrew Marsh and Donovan Olubade. But you're still able to get some nice pieces in the room. We saw what Raiden Vinesbright looked like this spring, same with Chris Lawson. And then there are a couple other promising pieces where Marcus Harris is coming along, and then Deji Jose and Desmond Roebuck who are coming in this fall. So I think that's a really solid group, but you can continue to improve on it, because I've had a couple people just reach out to me. Some of our insiders have said it, where they want to see those high-end guys come in at wide receiver, because we've seen it at a lot of other positions. We've seen the quarterbacks. We've seen it, at running back as well. When you talk about some of the guys that came in 2024, really every position has gotten some of those true high-end targets to come into the room. Where wide receiver, Kevin Cummings has done a good job scouting talent, getting a couple of 4-stars, but I think they're missing that one truly elite piece. And I feel like Vance Spafford or Mason James could be that. And then if you're able to flip another guy on top of that, whether it be one of these St. John Bosco guys in Daniel Odom or Matt Williams, or maybe, Luke Weaver, another guy I mentioned yesterday, just in that big sort of X receiver mold, that would be your ideal class at wide receiver. And I feel as days go by, and it's something I wanted to just give an update on after yesterday, when we spent a lot of time talking about Terrence Sarhian, where I continue to feel better and better about that. Where I looked at what this receiver class was last year, and it's a very solid, very talented class. But I look at just where Washington wanted to invest their resources, and it didn't necessarily come to fruition in the way that I think the coaching staff would have hoped. And I don't believe that that's going to be the case this year. Now, I want to stay on pass catchers here before we move on, and I want to talk about tight end, because I felt like there was a lot of momentum at the tight end position. And with his very, very long track record of finding success at the position, I have complete trust in Jordan Paopao pulling in the right players at the position. Now, I look at this and I say Washington's offered Kakua Amua, the 3-star tight end from IMG, and he's supposed to come up on an official on June 20th. I feel like he might not necessarily be the priority one on this target list right now, where I was big on Washington is going to end up taking 2 tight ends. I still feel like that's going to be the case. I know there are some reports out there that differ, and that's totally fine. I'm willing to see this through, because I look at the top 2 players that Washington is recruiting at the position right now. One being Landon Myrie, the 3-star from Cincinnati, Ohio, who is supposed to be coming up on that June 20th weekend as well for an official visit. And I say, I love his talent in terms of where he is right now as a route runner. And I think that that's somebody that you can add to the class and just play behind Decker DeGraff in that same sort of mold where you moved him as that, H-back move tight end sort of role as a true freshman. And you'll be happy with what he can give you just in terms of, again, what he is as a route runner right now ahead of his senior season in high school. So I look at that and I say, you can bring in another guy on top of that, depending on how this room shapes up with injuries, with who graduates, who might be moving on. And I look at a guy like Kai Wesley, who Jordan Paopao has continued to show that I believe he's the number 1 target at the position right now, because Jordan Paopao has taken a couple of in-home visits to see him, or just on-campus visits, really, just to continue to go watch him play baseball, which, again, I love for a 6'7", 6'8" tight end to be out there pitching. I think that rules. But I look at what Kai Wesley brings to the table, and that track record of developing him like a Tanner McLaughlin at Arizona, or like a Kaleki Latu in 2024, is so enticing to me. And I think that's one of the big reasons where I've been on this train for a while, where I wrote about him last fall for Huskies Wire saying, this is the guy that I believe is Washington's top target at the position, because of this frame. You don't find guys that are that big and just that naturally just coordinated and powerful is the best way to put it, because I look at where he is as a route runner right now, and I think there's a long way to go. And that's okay for somebody who is 6'7", 6'8", and 16 years old in that kind of frame. Those things are going to take a while to develop. But I look at what he can be as a blocker, what his frame can turn into. If you can get him up to, let's just say 250, 255, where that's an elite red zone threat right there, just in terms of what he can do coming downhill for you as a blocker, plus what he brings for you in the receiving game. And I'm just really interested to see if that is going to end up being the tight end class, because there's one other guy whose name I want to throw out there. It's Sam Viladol, a late 3-star offer from Oregon, where I look at that guy and I say, I like what he brings. And, it's kind of similar to what Landon Myrie is in terms of a guy who runs routes really well, just has a lot of high-end potential as an athlete, doesn't necessarily have a lot of high-end offers right now. So if Washington is able to move quickly and set up an official visit like they did with 3-star defensive back Trey Pollard, I'm not necessarily going to be surprised there. A lot of really interesting names to keep an eye on there. And I feel like you could also say the same thing at linebacker. So let's dive into this linebackers class. I want to start with a guy who I've been really, really high on for a long time, and that's 3-star linebacker Ramzak Fruean, where he just wrapped up an in-home visit with Washington's coaching staff, led by linebackers coach Brian Odom, over the last couple of days, and it was really fun, where our buddy Scott Eklund over with dogman.com did a really nice interview, catching up with him and talking about some of the ways that he might be utilized in the defense, where this is a really big kid. He's 6'4", 205 pounds, and when you go and you turn on that tape, he is so athletic. He's got such a quick first step and just comes downhill with authority in the run game. But it's not just that. He's super athletic. He can play coverage in the pass game. He can drop back and play a zone in the middle of the field. I'm sure he could play man coverage against tight ends or bigger receivers if he really did ask him to, because he has that level of speed and change of direction, just all that sort of quickness that you look for in a linebacker. He brings all of that to the table. So I love all that for him. And one of the things that he mentioned in his interview with Scott was that he would be a very versatile piece in this defense, in a very similar role to the way that we saw X-Ray Alexander deployed this spring, and Devin Bryant as well, where he would walk down and play that outside linebacker role sometimes, and sometimes play that true inside backer next to somebody like Zajus Rani-Saleh, Buda Alukta, Jacob Manu's, just somebody in that right. So I look at that and I say, I think he is Washington's top priority at that true linebacker position right now. When I say a true linebacker, I mean more of an inside than outside backer at this point in time. I'll dive into that in a couple minutes, because I have some other thoughts on that position as well. But I look at that and I say, I look at where Washington is right now, and you're going to have I don't want to say a major overhaul over the next 2 years, but you're going to see a lot of guys depart, where Jacob Manu, Buda Alukta, and X-Ray Alexander, the 3 guys you brought in out of the transfer portal, all have 2 years of eligibility remaining if they want it. Now, I say that because we don't know what Jacob Manu's status is going to be coming into fall camp, where I know Jedd Fisch has said he expects him to be cleared on August 1st, where he's coming off a torn ACL that he suffered last October. But that's one where we'll just take it day by day and see what that looks like when we get out onto the field in late July, early August, whenever fall camp starts up. So I look at that and I say, if he does end up playing this year and he's out of eligibility, Washington might be in a spot where they want to take 2 guys at that position. And I look at that other just kind of inside linebacker where you can move them around a little bit if you want to. And there are 2 names that stick out, and they both set official visits. One of them is another big player, kind of in that same mold of Ramzak Fruean, in Isaiah Tokyo. And I, from Oceanside High School in Southern California, I really like what he brings to the table. I think he's a fun player who has a lot of potential. I think that Ramzak is a lot more ready to play than Isaiah is right now, but you see all those physical traits on tape where he's got a really nice break on the ball. He's a big hitter. You can move around the formation a whole bunch. I think he's more of a just pure outside linebacker where you can put a lot of weight on his frame and have him be somebody who can help you out just as an edge setting run defender kind of guy. But I'm curious to see how he fits into that group, because I think he and Stanford commit Wasi Lalobi, one-time Washington commit, are 2 guys who might end up battling for a spot. Now, when I look at Wasi Lalobi, again, former Washington commit at Eastside Catholic High School here on the east side of Washington, who flipped to Stanford a couple of months ago after the whole coaching change when Robert Bala ended up down in Florida. I look at that and I say, if he ends up coming back to Washington, that would be a really nice win, because he looks so much like Alfonso Tuputala on film, where he's in that 6'1", 6'2" kind of mold, just a really thick, heavy lower half that helps him just set the edge with a lot of power, where we see him play that outside linebacker, edge rusher sort of role a lot. But he's also somebody who can just line up at inside linebacker and just be a true rover in the middle of the field. So I think if Washington were prioritizing one guy, I have a feeling they might look at the in-state guy there. I'm curious to see how that one shapes up, because there's a whole lot of moving pieces at the linebacker spot right now. And when I look at both of these guys, I see that high-end potential, and I think that they would do really well to develop in Washington's system for a year or two, especially with the role we've seen Devin Bryant take this spring, plus Jonathan Epperson, Zedric Radisale, again, who's coming off an ACL tear of his own, just like Jacob Manu. I look at what those guys could bring to the field this fall, and I say Washington is looking really good at linebacker. And that's without mentioning Donovan Robinson from the 2025 class, who's going to be coming in this fall, and he's listed as an athlete, might end up at safety. It seems like that's kind of the short-term plan for him, but with his frame at 6'3", 215, 220, he could very well end up at linebacker as well, because he has that kind of athleticism. So I look at where that position is right now, and I say, if you end up taking two guys in that inside linebacker sort of mold, where they both have that versatility to move around the formation a little bit, I think you're going to be in a really good spot there. But one thing I wanted to spend a few minutes on here at the end of the show is I want to talk about the outside linebacker position, because one guy who's going to be coming up on an official visit on May 30th that Lars and I talked about earlier this week is 4-star Landon Barnes from Duncanville High School in Texas. And I think he is a really important target for Washington's coaching staff. I don't know if they're necessarily in the lead for his services right now. I think they're in a really solid spot with him, but I think that somebody in that mold is a very, very important piece of this defense in this 2026 recruiting class. Somebody who you don't want to, get up to 250, 260 in terms of their weight, because, you'd rather have them be that pure pass rush kind of guy who just plays that wide-eyed stand-up outside linebacker role a decent amount, where, it's nice when you have somebody who can play on all three downs. But if you have somebody who is just a dedicated pass rusher that you can throw out there in various sets, and maybe you move them around a little bit, right? Maybe you do what we saw last year, and we'll certainly see again this season, something I talked about with Derek Coleman Bruce a few weeks ago, where he'll line up further inside just as a stand-up pass rusher, and you find ways to just utilize his athleticism in different sorts of matchups. I could see Landon Barnes doing that. Again, I look at this recruitment right now, and I say, I'm very curious to see how it shapes up, because pulling a 4-star guy like that out of Texas is not going to be easy. But I think Washington might be able to sell him on that early playing time sort of role. And if not, I think there are other options at the position. Another guy who I've talked about a lot in this mold is somebody who we know Washington is certainly going to be trying to flip players. I wouldn't be surprised if modern-day edge rusher Sean Scott is another player in that mold, somebody who Lars and I talked about with CJ Lavender when he committed to Washington, as somebody who he's been working hard on. He has committed to USC, but that's one of those things where let's see how that works out, especially with this very, very large USC recruiting class, where he's somebody who, if you like him in that inside-outside sort of mold, that's great. But if you think he can just line up at outside linebacker and be a pass rusher for you, I think that's something that Ryan Walters is really prioritizing in this defense, because when you go back and you watch, Nick Scorton is the guy I like to reference when, it's somebody, again, I talked about with Derek Coleman Brusa, but I look at what he brought to the table as just that bigger outside linebacker sort of mold, and just seeing him get off the edge and play with dip, play with bend, and just have a whole bunch of different pass rush moves that he can go to was very, very important. And I think if you have somebody across from him who is a little bit lighter and can win with a little bit more speed than power, and, you can have somebody step up into just some of these bigger defensive tackles that are going to be playing against one-on-one matchups on the interior when Washington does deploy these 5 down fronts, which we certainly are going to see a whole lot more often than we saw in the spring game, which is something I've gotten a lot of questions about. I look at that and I say, if you have somebody who can force a quarterback to not back up and retreat out of the pocket and then roll out left or roll out right, I think that having somebody who can win with that speed consistently is a very, very important part of this defense. And I think that's something that a Landon Barnes, a Sean Scott sort of mold can bring to this unit. And so, as I just kind of see where Washington is going to end up recruiting over the next couple of weeks, I feel like new targets might end up revealing themselves at that position, whether it be a late offer or something like that. Because I look at that position and I say that's the one thing that I don't think Washington has a lot of just out there notable options right now. I think Landon Barnes is a great choice. If he ends up being the guy that they are able to secure a commitment from, that is a fantastic win for this coaching staff. But I look at it and I say, outside of Sean Scott, there weren't really a lot of other options in that. Let's just, just to throw out a body type, 6'3", 6'4", between 230 and 240 in terms of the weight, that are just a pure speed rusher that can win like that for you off the edge. So if there are some late offers at the position or Washington's able to set up an official visit, which is somebody in that mold, I'm not going to be really surprised, because I think that that's something where we look at Washington's top targets right now, whether it be Kari Wilder, Fasiale, David Schwartzel. Those are guys who can play inside and outside. You look at T.I.U. Bukais and Dakota Dixon. Those are true defensive tackles. Derek Coleman-Brusa, Washington's one commit along the defensive line. He's got that ability to play inside and out, which is great because you want a lot of guys with that versatility and with that great size. But having somebody else who can just be a pure pin your ears back and rush kind of guy is way more important than some people think. And I look at what this class looks like. Washington wants to pull in a whole lot of big-time bodies along the defensive line, so that's just something to keep an eye out for. But that's all I got for you today. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. To all you everydayers out there, it really does mean a lot. Thank you so much for being here. And if you want to stay up to date with all the latest in Husky athletics throughout the offseason, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there, we're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.